We are back with Hoda's exclusive interview with the family from New Orleans whose harrowing experience with the coronavirus captured national attention.
Yeah, Savannah, Louisiana did emerge as one of the nation's hotspots for COVID-19. And Mark Freelow was the very first patient at East Jefferson Hospital. He spent 22 days there before being discharged in April. He was intubated. And his wife, Heaven, put a spotlight on the virus with a Facebook post, and it detailed their family's ordeal, and it was viewed and shared thousands of times. Well, now they're giving their first television interview. The Freelows want to spread the message it could happen to anyone.
I was one who didn't think that I would be the type of person who would get a bad disease like this, and it hit me like a ton of bricks.
45-year-old Mark Freelow never thought catching COVID-19 was a possibility, but in early March, the young father and lawyer knew something wasn't quite right.
Most of it was the fever, soreness, and just overall exhaustion.
Mark's symptoms got worse. His fever increased. His wife of 12 years, Heaven, became worried.
I was actually in the bedroom in the very next room, and he said, "I'm going to go take a shower." And then I heard him talking, and I'm like, who is he talking to? So I went in there, and he had come out of the shower, and he was wrapped in a towel sitting on the ledge of our bathtub. And I said, "Babe, you know who you're talking to?" He was very delirious, and I could see that something wasn't right.
After an unbearable night of fever, shortness of breath, and delirium, Mark went to the ER at East Jefferson General Hospital. He was tested for COVID-19, and the results came back positive. Before he even learned the results himself, Mark had to be intubated. Heaven, to hear that information had to be terrifying for you as his wife.
It was. He seemed to be okay. I knew he had pneumonia, but I didn't know it was going to progress that fast.
Once the news settled in, Heaven noticed her community was doubting the seriousness of the virus, so she decided to share what her family was going through publicly.
I saw some Facebook posts saying, "Hey, does anyone really know somebody who's got this?" And that's when I said, you know what, I have to say yes. So I did, and after I posted it to my friends, they urged me to make it public. I wanted them to know that it was here in our community already.
In her post, Heaven wrote, "He was misdiagnosed last weekend and told he had the flu. He is in East Jeff ICU with the virus and double pneumonia," adding, "It could happen to anyone." The post attracted thousands of views and brought national attention on a disease thought only to affect the elderly and sick.
The medical staff at East Jefferson was fantastic to me, but they were a little confused as to what really to do with me, being the first patient there.
No longer able to visit Mark in the hospital, Heaven tried to keep spirits up at home. You have a young son, Ethan. What were you telling Ethan in that moment, Heaven?
I was still trying to be extremely positive.
But the longer Mark was on the ventilator, that positivity began to fade.
He wasn't getting any better. As a matter of fact, a few days more, and it seemed like he was getting worse. So at that point, you know, I stopped telling my son, you know, everything's going to be okay, because I didn't know, you know, and that was tough.
Tell me about that moment when you were wondering what was going to happen to your husband.
I remember laying in bed thinking about it, and I just had this feeling, you know, I said, you know what, I'm going to pray really hard about this. So I did. And the next morning, the infectious disease doctor told me about the experimental drug for him. And so I took that as a sign, and I said yes.
Mark started the drug remdesivir, and nearly a week later, hope. After 15 total days on a ventilator, doctors were able to remove the machine and wake him up. Do you remember the first thing you thought when you opened your eyes?
The nurse was kind enough to bring in my phone or her phone and did a FaceTime with Ethan and Heaven, and I was able to first see them. What did that feel like, hearing his voice and seeing him for the first time?
It was great, but then I was like, hey, maybe we're over this big hump, you know? It was just, it was great.
Mark, the road to recovery is not an easy one. It's not like you open your eyes and hop out of bed and skip on home. There's a whole process there. Tell me a little bit about what that was like.
I couldn't walk, and I was weak. I hadn't realized that much time had passed, that the muscle atrophy and the other results of being on the paralytic and on the vent, that it had weakened me so much. It really was very, very difficult, and also very humbling experience to go through all of that.
Mark, Heaven, and Ethan are confident that the fighting spirit it took to conquer COVID will serve their family well on the road to recovery.
They always say, you know, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. So I definitely feel like I got some big shoulders, apparently.
Well, of course she does. Her name is Heaven, after all. And, you know, they talk about wearing masks. And I think they said their eyes were open to it. They said they don't judge those people who don't choose to. But they say by doing it, it's like kind of a language of love. You're doing it for someone else. And they wanted to get that message out, too.
Yeah. And so, I mean, has he fully recovered? He looks good. And what about Heaven and Ethan, their little boy?
Yeah.
Did they get sick?
Well, you know what? He is working. He's a lawyer. He's working from home. He's not 100% back, but he's on the road back. And as for Heaven and Ethan, they never really got tested, so they don't know for sure. But I think they kind of believe they did because, you know, some of the symptoms and things. But I have to tell you, it's so good to see them up and about. And Mark has like the best sense of humor. He was joking the whole time about what the doctors and nurses thought of him. So they kept that intact, too. So we're just happy for that whole family, Savannah.